I sat on that bed and I was really struggling to breathe at one point. I thought about pushing the button, but because I grew up in the South Bronx and we're supposed to be these tough men, I said, no, I could manage this. I could get through this. I always do. I waited about 45 minutes. And when I finally pushed the button, the nurse came in and she just looked at me and she just hit the cold blue. That was the beginning of my experience of dying. And I had a series of emotions because I was suffocating, so it was kind of slow. I'll tell you what my first emotion was. When everybody ran into the room, my first emotion was shame. Just stripped me down so quickly that I just felt shame. After I had that sense of shame, I started to feel, what if this is real? What if something's really happening here? And what's going to happen to my family? And that created a tremendous lump. I started thinking about God. You know what? If you get me through this event, I will change. I'll change my way of being. I'll be a better person. You won't regret it, kind of thing. I'm waiting. Nothing happens. And then I felt this sense of anger. Like I knew he wasn't real. And then I got this tremendous sense of fear. And because I thought when I die, there's nowhere for me to go. I didn't believe in anything. That I would just be shut off like a light bulb and just turn into nothingness.
North Carolina is beautiful, but Caswell County is the county that I grew up in. It's one of the poorest counties in the country. It has a lot of deep-rooted racial tension. Even to this day is one of the highest active Ku Klux Klan activity in the country. Creates a lot of dynamics where people get traumatized and it goes unresolved and unaddressed. You start hearing people around you kind of echoing the same hate that they've received from white people around us. You hear it being echoed in our houses, and like they're this way, they're that way. It gets reiterated and recycled in your day-to-day life, in your house, in school. It's just all of it, and it informed how I felt like I was supposed to behave here. So I just started hating back. And when you have this narrative that you're just recycling in your head over and over and over, you ignore the good stuff and you only center the bad. And that's where your narrative gets buttressed with not any outlier. The outliers don't matter at all. It's just the narrative. Everything that supports the narrative is the only thing I can see. You may very well be justified in your anger, but you're definitely gonna feel justified in your anger, right? But my anger killed me.
Instead of drifting off to this gray state, when I had surgery before, it wasn't dreaming. It was really just like gray fog. Well, this time I woke up and I thought, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to wake up here. Because I didn't believe in any of this. I'm looking around thinking, I don't believe in this. Why am I here? And then surprisingly, there was an answer from outside, and which really shocked me. I didn't know that anybody else was with me in whatever this was. So I get this answer, and the answer was it was like it was all around me. And the voice said, welcome home. This is your home. You're a part of us. You're a part of this. You're a part of me. Welcome home. And I'd never felt, in my entire life, I'd never felt that welcomed anywhere. Not as much as I was being welcomed wherever this was that I was in now. And I could feel waves of peace coming like from outside of me, coming through me, I guess probably trying to keep me calm. And I felt waves of love, just pure unconditional love coming from somewhere else. And I'd never felt anything like that before, ever. And I didn't know what that was all about, but I immediately knew that wherever I was home, that that place we call Earth wasn't my real home, that this was. And while it was a form of reality, it wasn't my ultimate reality, that wherever it was that I was now, that was real. There was a figure that came up to me kind of from off to the side. She seemed to just come out of nowhere. And she came up to me and she gave me a big welcoming embrace of just love and told me that she was going to be my teacher, that she would help me, learn what I needed to learn.
Once I got through the tunnel, I ended up in this tree. And I don't even know where to begin to describe this tree, but I was sitting in this tree and I was greeted by, I call it an ascended master, or an angel, if you will, or an entity or a being that was advanced. Being agnostic at the time, I didn't believe that there were angels. I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in Jesus. You live, you die, you work, you get a family, you buy a home, and that's it. There was no interpretation. There was no alertness to religion. I just denied it, if you will. But I just didn't believe in the God that I had been taught. I'm having this conversation with what I call God. But it wasn't the man in the beard and the white cloak and the staff, and it was an entity surrounded by gold fragments of life. Imagine a fire going out and the ambers, the gold ambers, just are floating all around you, but multiply that by 10 times. This fragment of energy was going through me. It came from my in the back and went out through my solar plexus, and I could feel this kindness and compassion and love that, how do you describe it?
And so when I'm aware again, I'm in this dark place and it's really dark. You can't see your hand in front of your face, but it's weird because I still have this visual image of me in that space. I'm crying and I'm mad and scared and okay, there's got to be something I'm supposed to figure out here that I'm not getting it. I'm not getting something. Why am I in this place? There's got to be a reason. And I was looking around and it just came to me and I thought, because you made this place. It still gets me. Light started pouring through. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's another place. There's light. I'm going to get out of here. Oh, I've got goosebumps. So the light starts coming through the darkness. The spirit comes toward me and it's huge, like huge in a way that something is grand and takes your breath away. And I'm seeing the spirit and she's coming closer and closer to me. And I was so happy to see her. I'm like, oh, thank God there's somebody here. And she opens her arms. And as she opens her arms, I'm just pulled into her arms by her will. She didn't have to touch me. She put one arm around me and her energy was just circling around us. And all these shards of the broken darkness kept trying to get at me. And they would hit her energy and they'd go flying off and they were gone. And I knew they weren't just like gone out of sight. They were gone forever. That piece of the darkness was gone forever because she had fixed it. So I'm calming down and everything, and I'm trying to figure out who she is. I know her. And I look up and I look at her face and I look at those blue-green eyes, and on the top of her head, she's got this red-orange hair that looks like fire on her head. And I immediately knew it was my grandmother. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's my grandmother, my mom's mom. Her name was Levita Patrius, and she worked in the steel stamping plants in Michigan, and it was a horrible job. And she lived with us when I was really little. Every day I would sit on the porch and wait for her to come home, and she would come home just red-faced and soaked in sweat. I mean, it was hard physical labor. And I just loved her. She was just an incredible person. She was a force.
I was just floating in this beautiful night sky, and I began to feel this connection to everyone I'd ever met. Sometimes near-death experiencers talk about a tunnel that they go down, but I was in the night sky, then very quickly I was just in the stars. And when I was in that place, I began to feel a deeper sense of peace because I felt this consciousness coming toward me that was like the light of God, perhaps. It was a light that was full of intelligence and peace and joy. These messages started coming toward me, and the messages are very simple. One was, love is all that matters. It's all that we take with us when we go. The other was, remind them to go to nature. And then I started to see little images of myself playing as a kid in nature and how happy I was. And then I thought, okay, maybe adults get too serious and we need to go play in nature more often.
So I had what I now know was a life review. My teacher brought me to a pond, a small lake up in the mountains, and asked me to touch the surface of the pond. Said, well, I know what's going to happen if I touch the surface of this pond. There's going to be ripples that form. And she said, just do it anyway. So I did it anyway, kind of sat back and just watched. I watched all the ripples, and on top of these ripples, it surprised me because I was starting to see almost like little videos or little scenes all across the surface of the pond. Like one video was an incident in my life where I had helped someone. Here is an incident in my early life where I had said something that inadvertently hurt someone. And so I was seeing all these different parts of my life. And when I focused on each of those little videos, I got sucked into it. It was like I was living that experience all over again. And I got to experience it not only from my standpoint, but also from the standpoint of the person I was interacting with. So it was like I got to see both sides of the story at the same time. I got to experience it.
So there I'm sitting on this tree in a stratosphere before me with my life review. It began from the time I was born in a hospital until the time I died. And I watched everything in my life, moments that you forget about, moments that you driving around and you acknowledge someone across in the street, or you see a child at a park, and every moment of my life had been recorded like a matrix. It was like everything was showing simultaneously of everything, every conversation, every person, every situation, every encounter, every moment that no one thought, or when we go back to those moments, we think no one's watching. Everything recorded. And I remember in high school, my sister was sharing a locker next to me, and it was my birthday. And my sister and I were very close, and all my football buddies were around me, and she was saying, aren't you going to say how much you love me and how much you care for me? I'm your best friend. And I'm watching this moment, embarrassed because she's doing all this in front of my friends. And I'm watching this as though not in a perspective of judgment and sadness, but awareness. Watching my sister say all these things, and I could hear my thoughts in my head, watching this moment in my life, saying, oh, just go away, my friends are watching. And I didn't say anything, and I walked away. That was the night my sister was killed by a drunk driver. What I learned was those moments when we go through life that we don't share with people, how much we love them, how much we care for them. The moment for me as I looked down, there was no judgment. He's like, this angel, if you will, see what you did. There wasn't any of that. What was there was in my heart, you could have done better, Peter. My sister and I were left in an orphanage, and when you have a bond with the only family member that you remember, when I lost her, it was tough. And these moments kept occurring where you would see your life, that you look down, again, no judgment, but an observation with kindness and compassion and understanding for yourself of everything that we do, that we think we're not being watched. It's our life. Those moments that we can shine as individuals, every moment of our life are recorded. I didn't murder anyone. I didn't, rob a store. I wasn't vile to people. But what I did see, as I said, were these moments where I could have shined, where I could have helped someone that needed help.
Good. And he showed me myself in this grocery store, this little grocery store in this town we used to live in. And there was a lady ahead of me in line, and she didn't have enough money to pay. She was trying to figure out what to put back. And I was a single mom, and 3 kids, and I'd been there. And she was so embarrassed. She's apologizing to the people in line. And I stood close to her and I said, "Hey, here." And I took the money out of my purse and I gave it to her. And she's like, "No, no, 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 that's okay. You don't have to do that. I'll just put this back." And she was going to put back the things that were for her. None of the things that I could see were for her family. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I know I've been in that spot. And I said, "It's okay, take it, take the money. It's like change, So she took it, and I'm like, wow, of all the good things I've done, that's it. That's the one, it seems so minor. And then the scene expands, and it's years down the road, and I can see her in this, like a food closet, food pantry sort of thing for people who don't have enough food. And this lady comes in, and the lady that I had helped in the grocery store is working behind the counter. And a woman comes in, and she's like, "I'm so embarrassed. We just don't have enough food." And the lady's like, "It's okay." Gets me every time. "It's okay. I've been there myself. Let me help you. Don't feel bad." And I was amazed at the ripple effect. I thought, I handed 70 some cents to a woman, and it's still changing the world this many years later. And so I'm like, okay, what's the bad thing? And I'm thinking of all the things that I don't want to watch myself relive with God standing next to me. And he pulls up this scene, and it's this, I worked with this nurse, and she was very hard to work with. She had a very difficult personality. I found myself like picking up a lot of the slack and kind of resenting her for that. And I never said anything negative to her, but I thought a whole lot of negative things. And I was thinking very judgy thoughts about her. And God showed me her life, and I was just blown away. And he showed me all the things that her dad had done to her and all the abuse that she'd endured. And still, she decides to go into a helping profession. So while she was not what I would consider an ideal nurse, she had so overcome her past. And despite all of the horrible things she'd been subjected to, she chose to go into a profession where she could help people. And God told me, he said, you have to be careful. Thoughts have energy, and words have more energy, and actions have more energy. And words and actions come from thoughts, and you have to learn to control your thoughts, because all those negative things that you think about her, it doesn't matter if you spoke them or not, that energy travels and it gets on her and it makes her more that way. And you make it harder for her to break out of that mold. That's why, you're supposed to pray for people who hurt you. Because by hating them quietly or by despising them quietly, you're hindering their being able to move on and be a better person. And it just blew my mind, because I was always that person who hated people who gossiped. Women would be standing around, and it's just so common in the nursing profession, and they'd all be standing there and they'd start talking trash about a fellow coworker, and I would just turn around and walk away. So they always thought I was weird, because I would just walk away in the middle of conversations. And I just thought, you're talking about her that way. I'm sure when I'm not here, you're talking about me that way, and I don't trust you for that. And I thought that I was better because I didn't say the things out loud. And so it really was an interesting perspective on something that I hadn't considered anything I needed to work on.
I started to feel that I was moving at a pretty high rate of speed through this light matrix, and became aware very quickly that these light energies were all souls. Some of them I recognized, some I didn't, but I still felt I knew them. I knew I had been there before, and I knew that every orb of light was unique, but yet there is absolutely no separation. They are connected to each other in a way that is just magnificent, and I'm connected to them. There were very rapid images of different events from the life of those souls, from the physical and earthly life. I had seen some of my own in what I might call a life review, but actually the focus was not really on my own, interestingly enough. The focus was on these frames, it's the only way I can describe them, of experience. But I received the message that it really was not about the events. The important message was to watch how those events affected the souls. And I started focusing on the orbs of light and the souls, and the message was given to me that nothing could harm the souls, no matter what these events were, that the soul remained immortal and intact. And I was shown a lot of things. I mean, births, deaths, and some pretty frightening images, conflict, war, people who had been traumatized in different ways. And again, I focused on watching the light, and I was told repeatedly, you see, none of these things can affect the soul. This is who you are. And nothing that's happened to you in your own life can really affect this, except for one thing. I thought, well, what is that? What is that one thing? And then I was shown slower images of events from both my life and from the life of the other orbs in the matrix. And the commonality of these events were all events where people had shown love or tremendous compassion to people who were suffering. They had helped somebody, smiled at somebody in a grocery store, simple events, or helped somebody through a tremendous illness, or shown compassion. And when those events were shown to me, and they were very clear that they were events of love and compassion, the lights became intensely brighter. Their vibration became quicker. It's the only way I can describe it. It was kind of a vibration of energy and light that became so intensely bright.
We had a very unfortunate individual who, on Christmas Day, had, from an oral infection, infected his native valve. The body recognizes that as something abnormal that it's got to take care of. Once we were able to accomplish the repair of the aneurysm and the replacement of the valve, we could not get the person off of the bypass. Every time the 4 or 5 liters of blood that we were pumping around his body, we would reduce down to 2 or 3, he'd begin to weaken and his blood pressure would go down and so on. To make a long story short, we simply couldn't get him off the heart-lung machine. Finally, we just had to give up. I mean, we just said, we cannot get him off of the heart-lung machine, so we're going to have to pronounce him dead. And my surgical assistant closed the patient in a way that a post-mortem exam could be done, because anyone who succumbs on the table has to, by law, has to have an autopsy. Well, the machine that records the blood pressure and the pulse and the left atrial pressure and all the monitoring lines and things continued to run the paper out onto the floor in a big heap. Nobody bothered to turn it off. And then we put down a transesophageal echo probe, which is just a long tube that has a microphone on the end of it, and we can get a beautiful picture on a monitor of the heart beating. Well, that machine was left on, and the tape the VCR tape continued to run.
Right.
And as we were standing there, it had been at least 20 minutes. You know, I don't know this exact time sequence, but it was close to 20, 25 minutes.
Right.
That this man recorded no heartbeat, no blood pressure, and the echo showing no movement of the heart, just
Right.
sitting. And all of a sudden we looked up, and the surgical assistant had just finished closing him, and we saw some electrical activity. Pretty soon the electrical activity turned into a heartbeat. Very slow, 30, 40 a minute. And we thought, well, that's kind of an agonal thing. And we see that occasionally, that the heart will continue to beat even though the patient can't generate a blood pressure or pump any blood. Well, pretty soon we look and he's actually generating a pressure. No, we're not doing anything. I mean, the machines are all shut off, and we're stopped all the medicine and all that. And so I start yelling, "Get anesthesia back in here and get the nurses." And to make a very long story short, without putting him back on cardiopulmonary bypass, the heart-lung machine and stuff, we started giving him some medicines, and anesthesia started giving him oxygen, and pretty soon he had a blood pressure of 80, and pretty soon a blood pressure of 100, and his heart rate was now up to 100 a minute. You know, he recovered and had no neurologic deficit. And for the next 10 days, 2 weeks, all of us went in and were talking to him about what he experienced, if anything. And he talked about the bright light at the end of the tunnel, as I recall, and so on. But the thing that astounded me was that he described that operating room floating around and saying, "I saw you and Dr. Cattaneo standing in the doorway with your arms folded talking. I didn't know where the anesthesiologist was, but he came running back in. And I saw all of these post-its sitting on the TV screen. And what those were any call I got, the nurse would write down who called and the phone number and stick it on the monitor, and then the next post-it would stick to that post-it, and then I'd have a string of post-its of phone calls I had to make." He described that. I mean, there's no way he could have described that before the operation because they didn't have any calls.
No.
Right?
And he's sitting on,
And
he's lying on the, so he must have been floating.
He was up there.
Yeah.
He described the scene, things that there is no way he knew. I mean, he didn't wake up in the operating room and see all this.
No.
I mean, he was out.
Right.
And was out for, I don't know, even a day or two.
Right.
While we recovered him in the intensive care unit. So what does that tell you?
What
does that tell you? Was that his soul?
I was able to see what was on the other side. And it was my physical body in the hospital bed, in ICU. My wrists were restrained to the bed. I was on the ventilator. obviously unconscious. And I kind of looked at all my vital signs and saw that they weren't great. And I looked at all the drugs that were hanging on the IV and was able to determine that I was in an induced coma just based on the drugs that were hanging. And then I remembered I was a nurse. Immediately knew it was my grandmother. And I remember asking her if I was dead. And she said, "Oh, no, 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 you're not dead." She said, "You're kind of in between. You've got the you that's, sick in the hospital, and then the spirit side of you that's here, and there's a cord that's attaching you to your body." And so in that moment, I was like, I had to decide whether I was going to go on this next leg of the journey with God or not and be okay with it. That was the big part, be okay with it. And I remember standing there thinking, okay, let's do it. As soon as I said that, this light from him, kind of a piece of the light swirled off and it came around my feet and it came into me through my toes and I could feel it tingling and vibrating, and it came up through my legs and it got to my middle, and I felt it like wrapping around. It was like a cloak made of light. And I could feel it going around my internal organs. Like, how when something bad happens, you have that awful feeling in your gut, that kind of visceral reaction. It was healing those visceral reactions I had had over a lifetime that were making me sick. And it started to move up. I felt it go into my chest, and I felt it go around into my heart. And this thing's kind of swirling around, and it comes up. I can feel it in my neck, and my neck was really warm. And it came out of my mouth. And as it came out of my mouth, I started singing, and my tongue was glowing. And I'm a terrible singer. And I was singing like super good, like, go to an award show and ask Penny to sing kind of good. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hope if I go back, I can keep that, because my husband will love that because he's a musician. And so then the light starts going up, and I can feel it behind my eyes. But I closed my eyes. I didn't want to let it out. And so I squeezed my eyes shut, and it shot out through my eyelashes, and it hit the light that was around me, and it bounced back in and then like surged into my brain. And I could feel it going through every little curve and fold in my brain. And as it would go through, as the light would touch every little neuron in my brain, I would know things. I would know everything about the world, every question I'd ever had, every question anybody had ever had. And I remember in that moment thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing. There's no way he's going to let me have this. And so it goes through my brain, and then it stops, and all of that knowledge is gone, or a good amount of it.
And after a bit, I felt the presence of somebody else had arrived. So again, I lifted my head, and there were two female forms either side of me. And they got their hands over my body. They were kind of like just slowly hovering their hands over my body. I felt the energy that was coming from their hands was just really powerful. It was like I felt love coming from their hands, actually. And it was causing like a vibration to go throughout my body that was just sending this energy throughout, and they were healing my body, but not only my body and the physical wounds that I'd just been through, but I felt like my soul was being healed as well. I felt like all the years of baggage that I've been carrying with me that I talked about earlier, all the feelings of guilt and shame and all those things were just being slowly peeled off one by one, and they were just getting down to the pure essence of my soul and healing that.
I later found out that the cause of death was I bled to death, and that was basically, there were internal injuries that were spilling over. And so I looked at that, but then I looked up, and there were these light beings. Now I call them angels. They were just these intelligent beings, and they were unlike anything I'd ever imagined or thought. I didn't think of angels like this. Normally we think of angels with wings, but these were just, they looked like they had shimmery robes, and they weren't male or female. They sent telepathic messages to me. They said, you'll be fine. You'll walk, you'll run. Don't worry about this. We've got this. And then they almost playfully said, watch this. And they sent this blast of energy through the back of the surgeons into their hands, and it lit up my whole body. So I knew that they were participating in this healing. The neurosurgeons were great and talented, but I remember thinking, they're so smart, and I bet they have no idea that light beings are working through them. The experience felt real. It didn't feel like a dream. This felt like an added reality to this reality. So the way we're looking at everything and it looks 3D, it felt like I'd opened up 4D, 5D, 6D, whatever. It just felt as if I'd opened to see what happens beyond the veil. These angels were participating with my surgeons, but they were just there in another realm that the human eye can't pick up on, but the spirit can.
Like one other I remember so vividly was a guy who was on anticoagulation, medicines that keep you from clotting. And I don't even remember the operation or whatever, but we had to do him right away. And you try and reverse that as much as possible, but it's impossible to completely do it. And we were in there and we'd finished the surgery and we just simply could not stop this person from bleeding.
Right.
I mean, we pulled out every gun in the armory
Right.
to try and get this
Everything you can
person.
possibly do.
Yeah, and we finally decided we're not going to be able to stop this bleeding.
Right.
And all of a sudden, nobody spoke because everybody in that room felt a presence.
Right.
And I mean, the anesthesiologist and I talked about it afterwards. I mean, there was no question. There was a presence in that room.
Right.
And he stopped bleeding just like that.
How do you explain that? What is your take on that, Dr. Ritchlin?
Oh, there's something out there that, people with faith believe is there. Some people call it God. Some people call it other things, Buddha or Muhammad or whoever. It has convinced me there is something out there.
It was so real. I mean, it wasn't like a dream at all. It's almost like my senses were multiplied. For instance, in this state, if I can see and smell and taste and hear and all those things, in that state, it was super sensory. It was so real that it makes this life feel like the foggy dream. It's like this feels like the weird, strange, dreamy state. That was reality.
I was standing in an open field. It was the most beautiful surrounding that I could have ever been in. And I'll tell you why, because where I was standing was in grass, and grass was up to about my waist. And that grass was not blowing like the wind, it was flowing. And I remember so vividly touching the tops of that grass and feeling something so special. It was like that grass was full of love. I don't know how to describe that other than I could feel that love coming from the grass. Now, one thing that was told to me when I was standing there by the person that was behind me was I was never to look back. But what I could do is I could look to the left and I could look to the right and I could look in front of me. And to the left, the far left, were trees. These were the most unusual looking trees that I have ever seen. They were trunks that were just huge in size. I could see leaves at the top, beautiful leaves. And something that I experienced was color. Color that I have never seen here up on the earth. You know, we see things in 3D here. You 10 times that, and the colors were just magnificent. The green that was on top of the trees were just something that I've never experienced before. The bark on those trees was the most beautiful brown color that I've ever seen. Now, to the right of that forest was wildflowers that I have never seen before in my life, mainly because the colors were just so beautiful. They were colors that I've never experienced before. And they were wildflowers, and the flowers came up again up to about my waist. I have never experienced love come from flowers, from plants, from trees, but I felt like it was alive, but it was alive with love, and it gave me so much peace. But when people ask, how can you describe the colors? They're undescribable.
The reality of it was so much more intense than what we all experience in everyday life. Like, for example, in terms of talking about the colors and about just the sensations of unbelievable, unconditional love and peace. The only thing I've said is, in the Bible, they call it the peace that passes all understanding. And it really does. You just can't express it. It's so intense and so indescribable.
So I went on a journey. She took me to all of many, many different places in what at first I thought was a spiritual realm that everybody saw. What it turns out that each person, when their soul finally crosses over, whether it's just temporary like me or it's the final time, you're in sort of a holding place or a decompression place for a while, a place where you can rest and recharge and kind of think about what happened in your life. So I was there, and what's done is it looks like a place that's comfortable for you. So for me, what I was surrounded with was nature. So that's what I experienced. And so she took me to many, many different places and taught me different things along the way. Teachings about love and gratitude and our connection to each other. That's really what formed the core of the rest of my time there. And even though I knew that this wasn't physical reality that I was in, it felt more real. It didn't feel like a dream. But it was different than physical reality. Like, I could interact with the things around me, which we can't do the same thing here. So I could touch, let's say, a flower, and there would be energy moving up through that flower, and it would be sparkling. And like, wait a minute, that's not Earth. Earth isn't like that. I could touch a tree, and the same thing would happen with the tree. But there was a point, though, at which we were walking through a meadow, I think, and I happened to I was curious. The scientist kind of came out in me. I looked behind me. I was beginning to wonder what was going on. So I looked behind me just a little bit, and I saw that everything behind me as I walked just faded away. So there was no landscape behind me, it was just fog. And I asked my teacher about this. I said, what's going on? This feels really real, but it's disappearing behind me. Well, she said, this is a construct for you. This isn't ultimately, I hate using the term heaven necessarily, but it's not the ultimate spiritual reality that's out there. This is really just a holding place for you. And it's a place where we draw on what's in your own heart, what you love, to make an environment that feels appealing and comfortable for you so that you're calm and feel at home. But it does feel more real than here. And in fact, it's still hard for me to be here because this doesn't feel real. This feels like the dream. That feels like being awake.
I remember feeling disappointed because I did not see any divine being. My parents didn't come to meet me. I didn't hear any music. There were no angels. But what did happen was God expressed concepts upon me that I wholly understood in that place. Concepts like, I am omnipotent. This is the divine source. I am the power behind all things. This is your real identity. Those were the concepts that were expressed to me. And I knew in that moment that somehow that veil had been pulled back and I was in some kind of place that I call them the ethereal, connected to the vast wisdom of the universe, all of it without words. And this peace came on me that is just inexplicable. And there I was. And it was kind of like communication was telepathic and synchronistic. If I wanted to know the answer to anything, all I had to do was think about it. And it was kind of like it was felt and then absorbed. And with each insight revealed, I thought, wow, this is how it works. Of course, it's really, really simple. And it was like these mathematical equations were just hanging all around me. And I thought, the universe, the way it works, it's so elegant and simple. It's only humans that have made it so difficult to understand.
I remember I was spinning in this rotating tunnel. I began to see mathematical equations, 222, 333, 444, 1111. I began to see all these quantum physics codes, geometry, physics. And at that moment, as I'm spinning as a spirit into this tunnel, I'm digesting every mathematical code. I knew exactly what it meant. And me, being an artist, very right brain, was operating on a left brain consciousness, digesting and absorbing and knowing all these mathematical equations and what they meant.
What I think of as a block of knowledge came into my being, and I began to know things that I didn't know before. It was being fed into me as if I were a receiving station. I had no thoughts of my own at all while this was going on. And what was being transmitted to me was that I was an immortal being, that I had always existed. I always would exist. I was eternal. I was indestructible. There's nothing that ever really could happen to me to wipe me off the face of the earth or any other place. And I knew that that was true. I didn't doubt anything that the light was giving me, because somewhere inside me, I knew the light was, I didn't think, oh, the light is God. I didn't think that. I just felt the light was from God.
When you have your experience of dying, you get this interconnectivity. You feel like you're connected to everything. So that sense of oneness is really profound. When you come back into your physical body again, you feel that sense of separation. So there's something about being in body that makes us feel like we're independent of the rest of the world.
It was then that I became part of and saw this gigantic web made of twinkling lights. The only way that I can explain this web and what it looked like is that it looked like it was made of trillions and trillions of neurons. And this web just seemed to extend out into infinity, and I was part of it. It was made of all of these sparks of light or twinkling lights, and I knew in that moment that each one of these lights that was inside the nucleus represented a life. And I was told in that place that that cork was how God creates. And I knew that God, love, and light were one. And these quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter. And quarks combine to create infinite possibilities in the universe. They could become a tree, a person, a dog, or a planet. And then it hit me. God uses light to create, transform, and heal us. So, stripped down to our essence, we're made of light. Everything is made of light. I knew in that place we're all made of the same stuff, whether it's animate or inanimate objects. We're all connected. We're all one. That was so amazing to me, to be connected to everything. And I thought, if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I love, the light will spread, illuminating the path for others. And it was there that I realized that loneliness is just an illusion, even here in the physical, temporal world. How can we be lonely when we're connected to everything?
I felt my consciousness being propelled out of that black void into what I would only describe as an amazingly beautiful night sky with bright lights and beautiful stars, colors I had never seen, vivid rays of light, and what appeared to be almost a very intricately woven spider web of light. It's the only way I can describe it. The stars, it was almost like I was looking at constellations. And I was a bit of a science nerd, so part of me at that point was kind of looking to see if I could actually recognize constellations, and I didn't. They were completely different formations, but none of them seemed haphazard. They all seemed purposeful. And it was just so beautiful, almost as if you were looking through the most powerful telescope you could ever look through. I remember feeling that I was just suspended in this web. And somehow also, I was aware that I was part of it, which was really interesting. I felt separate at first, and then very quickly felt that not only was I a part of this web of light and purpose, but I was an important part of that web. And this kind of blew me away. I was amazed. I was like, wow, I'm part of this?
Everything teaches us that we're separate. You're of that political party, I'm of this one. You're a woman and I'm a man, or you're gay and I'm straight, or you're black and I'm white, or I mean, there's all this segregation, all this division. The one thing that was so profound in my experience was the oneness, realizing that we are connected, that I am you and you are me, and that we're really here together. I mean, there's this whole great big universe. Universe. I love that because una means one and verse means song. There's this one big song, and each and every one of us have a part to play in that, a part to sing, and I sing at a tone that's far different than yours, and every tone comes together in the perfect melody, the perfect harmony. And there is no judgment. I'm going to move from this, and I'll tell you, when we pass from this life, we're going to be embraced by loving arms and simply asked, what did you learn? Tell me about what you learned in your experience. What was it like to be like that? What was it like to be you? What was it like to have this or not have that? And it's all going to be a collective oneness of, wow, look what we learned, look what we created, look at the uniqueness. And we'll realize we always were one.
It's really soothing, eye-opening, and it's very calming. It's a calming feeling that it permeates through you to know that everything is as it should be, in a sense, right? Everything's working towards a goal, and that goal is well beyond what we may ever know, but it's still doing it.
There's a woman I was exchanging with who was like, well, I don't want to just magically forget people that I love in this life. I was trying to explain that that's a human thought. It comes from a brain, it comes from memory, it comes from life, it comes from, but you're not gonna be, when you leave this body, a human body with a brain that has memory, you're gonna be an energy that's so connected to this experience and this whole thing that that experience is integrated in you. There is no missing or something missing from that. Experience isn't gone. It's always accessible. Every part of this experience that you have is etched in infinity. There is no something disappearing and never being experienceable again. Like, it's always there. So you don't miss anything. There's no missing anything. You're more integrated with the system outside of the body than you are in the body. And that's kind of what we are, is an individual node accumulating a perspective that ultimately gets fed back into the system and becomes a possibility, an option for everybody else in the system forever. So your experience isn't ever lost.